Welcome to Nuanced Beauty. This podcast is intended to be a spot where my husband Bill and I will capture some complex thoughts and challenge us to hold to our opinions loosely so that we can see the beauty in others and the beauty in ourselves. I want to challenge us to dive deeper into those everyday topics and those sticky topics that we might shy away from, or we might bulldoze over others with our opinions. Because I think there's wisdom in this idea that if we all thought exactly the same, there would be no need for anyone else. So let's have a conversation and let's get nuanced. Hi guys, welcome back to this week's episode of Nuanced Beauty. I'm Christina and I have Bill here.
Hey everybody.
And yeah.
So before we get started, I want to address the little square icon in the upper left of the podcast, the one that has our title card. That's the word. When this podcast started, this was Christina's podcast, and it had this beautiful rose vine word nuanced. It was very beautiful, but it was very feminine. And I said when I was going to be part of this podcast, I'd like a more gender neutral, a little bit less feminine title card.
Logo.
And so Christina went to her niece who does art, and had her make a second title card, and she put boobs on it. I don't know if you guys have noticed this. There was a
well-stacked front
rack.
and center with the raindrops.
So two equally sized raindrops just pushed together. They're just these perky raindrops, and that's not the masculine type of title card that I was looking for, but it made me giggle, so I left it in, even though it was the first thing I saw.
Mm-hmm.
And about 3/4 of the people we talked to, whether we solicited the question or not, pointed out that our title card looked like boobs, which again made me giggle a lot. But we did make the change, so it's a little bit less,
visually visually distracting from the nuanced beauty.
I can't think of something least.
Raindrops being metaphorical to represent having a conversation and ripples and people bouncing.
It's a metaphor.
Well, bouncing raindrops.
I don't know what your mind thinks that having boobs on the title card would be a deterrent. If anything, that'd be very attractive.
So if you notice, there is a third logo out there, and it's just slightly tweaked where there's kind of some depth to the raindrops hitting the water and creating some ripples. So you're welcome.
And if you didn't notice,
now
you're probably a normal human being and just listen to the podcast, and I appreciate you so much for doing that. Okay, so this week's topic, I got this kind of third hand, but I was listening to a podcast, and they were discussing Chelsea Handler, who guest hosted The Daily Show, I don't know, a week or so ago. I don't know how old the video I was watching was. But if you don't know who Chelsea Handler is, like, God love you. Like, she's a comedian. She's not a very funny one, but that's okay. Not every comedian's for everybody.
Comedian.
Even comedians aren't really comedians. And she definitely wasn't, because she spent like the first 15 minutes of the show just diatribing on how she does not want children, and she is tired of being asked why she doesn't want children. And she spent most of the time just bragging about how awesome her life is. Like, here's a picture of me climbing a mountain, and here's a picture of me smoking a joint in a hot tub. Look how great my life is. And the video was set up that I was watching to lambast this woman, and deservedly so. But it really, as we were thinking about it and talking about it, I realized that people ask people who don't have children, why don't you have children all the time?
When are you going
to have children? Yeah. And as awareness of people who have had miscarriages or struggle to conceive, as more of that awareness is out there, people are more sensitive to it. But the question is still out there all the time. Mm-hmm. The question that's never out there is, why do you have kids?
Or why did you have
Why
kids?
did you have kids?
Yeah.
And as I was kind of meditating on this, I realized I don't really know. And it's interesting because I know why I have the job that I have. I know why I married the woman I married. I know why I have a 4-bedroom house. I know why I bought a 2017 Ford Focus. I can talk actually for a while about that Ford Focus, but I cannot tell you succinctly
Like why we chose to have kids.
why we have and my entire life is oriented about these 2 children in our house, and everything I do is in service of their well-being and their like to grow them into human beings. And I do not know why we did this.
Right. So if we Bill brought this question to me and he asked it and I'm like, well, because we were gonna have 2 kids. We said we were gonna have 2 kids.
Mhm.
Like when we were dating, we definitely had conversations about what the future would be like. And one of those combos definitely was, oh, do you want to have kids? How many kids do you want to have? And I think we both just agreed, like, oh, two. Two's the number. You have 2 kids.
And I was a family of 2 kids. You were a family of 2 kids growing up. I
Mm-hmm.
assume that's where the number came from.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as you can see, it was not an examined thought. It was 2 19-year-olds who were engaged saying, two, two, two. You
Two
think
sounds
2?
good. Yeah.
I probably put more thought into what appetizers we were going to get before dinner that night. Like, oh, you want to do the queso? I think just two kids.
Right.
It was kind of
Exactly.
in the same tone.
Yeah, and then you fast forward in life and we had careers and it felt like, at least for me, we were kind of like, I don't know, 5 years into our marriage and we were kind of wondering at that point, or at least Bill was asking me, and not in like a pressure like, are we going to do this or not, but just kind of, like, okay, is it time, or should we, like, because I think that's the other component, is we did actually have a timeline when we said we were going to have 2. I think we pictured having them in our late 20s, and we were like, 28-ish or something, or 27-ish, and we're like,
Well, that was framed
it's
around our
our late
careers
20s.
because of the school we went to. We had to sail, or I had to anyway, because of just whatever the career trajectory was for exactly 5 years, and
Mm-hmm.
so it was after that
Yeah,
kids.
yeah, and that would put us in our late 20s
That would
too.
have, yeah,
So,
but
like,
that was
okay.
why we picked that.
Yeah, and there's probably a component for me of like, okay, well, we'll be established in our careers and we'll have a little bit of money and like we'll be somewhat in a good spot to have kids. So then, we got to the point where we're in our late 20s and Bill's like, okay, so are we gonna, do this, or should we like reconsider? Are we gonna push this out? Like, where are we at? And at that time, we kind of just decided to stop not trying, and it happened very quickly. And
Oh
we
yeah,
had a kid number 1.
yeah. It was yeah. It happened.
We were having theoretical conversations when I was probably
You're
pregnant.
probably already pregnant, and I remember
Yeah.
being very, very clear in that conversation because as much as I'm the one sitting here saying, "Why did we do this? Why did we do this?" As my kid's currently having a tantrum in his room because I wouldn't let him go try to find his Minecraft sticker book because it's an hour past his bedtime, and I'm not going to let him turn the lights on, and he's having a sorry.
We did it.
We did the thing.
We did the
Uh,
thing.
but I was kind of the driver of you bringing the conversation up, but I also didn't want to put that pressure on because you were going back to sea, you were loving being at sea, and I was kind of like, so are we? Are we not? Can we could have the conversation? We're allowed to talk about it.
Uh-huh.
But
Uh-huh.
yeah, there was.
This sense of like, okay, we're kind of at our timeline. We're kind of at this like thought process that we had originally. Do we need to reassess and all
We've
that?
met the first quarter goals.
Yeah, we met the first quarter goals. Now we're moving forward, and of course, like I said, we had combos. We said we're gonna stop not trying, and I like to say that God's like, "Yep, okay, boom,
Boom.
and here's your first." So like that's our perspective, right? But
Hmm.
like, what else could we like kind of dabble into this? Like, we're obviously Christians,
Hmm.
so from that perspective and that timeline, it feels almost like culturally appropriate. And I guess whether you're Christian or secular, there's like a sense of being in a committed relationship, having a stable home and job, and then having kids. And by no means does everybody do that, but that's kind of the ideal, because we do have that sense of like there is a good way of I don't know. Is good even right? Like, because I don't want to be a jerk here and be like, oh, if you don't do it in this order, it's no
we
good.
can call it ideal.
Yeah, an ideal.
And I'll tell you, there's nothing that's made me respect single moms more than parenting with a spouse, because oh my God, would this be so hard to do on your own? So
Yeah.
I've reflected on that a lot about the moms who did it on their own. My mom,
right, and my parents divorced very early and remarried, and had my brother as a teen parents. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Not to
none of this
at
is to
all
cast aspersions,
shameful.
but there have been studies, and I don't know what they are. I've read them at some point. They talk about outcomes of children from single parent homes versus within a married, and the outcomes are better. So we would put a religious cast to it because we received our instruction in that way, but the outcomes are the outcomes, and so there is validity to things should go in a certain order. And this is the plot line of your life.
So
as supposed to go
committed couple
on purpose.
and then on purpose, and it makes for maybe potentially a kinder upbringing for the kids.
The double edge of that, though, is the first 10 minutes or so of the movie Idiocracy, which if you haven't seen the first 10 minutes of the movie Idiocracy, pause this podcast right now. It's on YouTube. And it's worth the watch. The whole movie's worth the watch, but the first 10 minutes could be a standalone short film about a divergence in cultures wherein one group of people wants their life to be perfect before they start having kids. So like, oh, kids in this economy? Oh no. Not no. First, I have to be at director level, and so they put off having kids. And they're talking about like the affluent, upper middle class white people like doing this.
Yeah, so this like idea that you have to have financial stability in order to have kids, or that like
what ended up happening is that you end up 45 and you think, oh yeah, I can have kids at 45. It's actually really freaking hard.
Yeah.
So you're freezing eggs, you're doing IVF, even in your 36 or whatever, you're a geriatric pregnancy, which I think is some problematic language.
Yeah.
But they use it. Meanwhile,
36 or is it 34?
Whatever. It's too young to be called geriatric,
35,
regardless.
whatever. Yes.
So there is validity to the wanting your life to be somewhat stable, which is a desire we had, but then we also were seeing this, the average age of a woman becoming pregnant jumped from like 22 to 28 in the last 5 years or something like that. I'm completely making up numbers, but the age is going up.
Right, and I would say even like from a female perspective, like we're really chasing after these careers and chasing after a family. So buying into that concept of you can have it all and you can do it all, but there's really sacrifices to be had. So like you mentioned, like we think it'll be easy to just postpone having kids and push that into our 30s. And that like, what was that? You told me that movie. It was Baby Mama.
It was Baby Mama. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, there's some quote in there about to become a CEO, like the youngest female CEO means I'm the oldest mom at preschool. And so it kind of paints a picture of that tension that we feel toward wanting to succeed in the workplace and wanting to succeed as families. And obviously, I mean, we would challenge even that stereotype because we're both pretty involved parents, and we both get so annoyed with some of these tropes of like the female being the one wanting a family and needing to be most in the family, and the guys are checked out or most in the career, but they still stand. The stereotypes
dopish,
are there.
doltist, incompetent fathers, as you'll see in any 90s sitcom, going all the way back through the Simpsons, going back to the Honeymooners, frankly. And that's the idea of women balancing the workforce and childbearing. That's a whole nother episode.
Yeah.
But there's that cover. Was it Time or the Atlantic that had like the woman in the business suit with one boob out breastfeeding?
I don't know.
Like, and she had like the Wonder Woman pose because she was having it all,
Yeah, and it's like there's choices to be made, and there's balance to be found, and we can't really have it all without sacrifice.
It's only 24 hours in a day.
Yeah, time is finite. Your resources and attention are finite.
Any one person's competence. It's about just your bandwidth in the day.
Yeah. Oh, and then though there would be like, because we really haven't touched on the fact that there are some folks who like really wanted to have kids. Like they've known they wanted to have kids their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're like, that is, they want a family, or they wanted and they now have a family.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking back to early in our marriage, chatting with a fellow alumni gal, and we were chatting over Facebook Messenger or something, and she said something like, "Oh, can't you just like, or you just can't wait to have kids, right?" Or something like that. And of course, me, like, it wasn't in my timeline for us to jump to start a family. So I have no idea how I responded, but I'm sure it was awkward. Like, yeah, maybe eventually, like, yeah, we're going to have two. And then, like, conversation totally fizzled out because we were not like jiving on that topic because, like, this person was like, yeah, I can't wait to have kids.
You
I'd
answered
probably have
it like
several
how
kids.
someone would talk about life insurance. He was like, yeah, I should really get me one of those life insurance policy. That's important. Yeah, I'm with you.
I probably did. And of course,
Yeah.
like, it sounded totally not emotional. There was no lovey-dovey, like, I can't wait to
Nope.
have
It
kids.
was just part of the plan, and the plan was executed.
Yeah. So, like, we, maybe like for us, this question is an interesting question, but for some, I think they're like, well, of course I wanted kids. But I almost wonder if, like, to go back to your intro, people will ask, like, why you don't want to have kids, but they don't necessarily ask why you had kids. I mean, maybe sometimes, but, or like, why did you want to have kids? That
Mm-hmm.
question just isn't posed often because it's
Yeah.
almost like assumed once you have kids, you must have wanted
Yeah.
kids, or if you didn't, you don't want to dance with asking that question.
The whoops question.
Was this a whoops kid? Yeah.
Yeah, you want to do the math and be like, you were only 15. Like that question. Like, I don't know if you ever run into that scenario.
Where you come like,
Mhm.
I shouldn't share family
Like
stuff about
folks
a whoops
do
baby.
folks do ask about number of kids, and that's something you've discovered since moving to the South is people
Yeah.
will ask like more invasive questions like, oh, why the age gap? What happened between those two?
Culturally, like that is something that we've totally observed since going from the Northwest to the Southeast. That I was having a conversation with a gal and with my kiddos, and we have a 6-year-old and a kiddo turning 2 this summer. So they have 3.5, 4.5 years between them. 4.5 years between them.
Good math, son.
4.5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But so someone had asked like, oh, why the gap? And it may have been a question, and I by no means am I like offended that she asked the question. I was just surprised by the question because no one had ever asked me that, because I don't know, like it never came up in conversation that I had a gap in my kids' ages. And I feel like in the Northwest, a lot of friends that we knew had one kid or two kids, and they really did like, they tried as hard as they could, and you can't control these things, but they tried to plan them and potentially did space them out too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, there's too many opportunities for that question to have a really sad answer that you don't just have that casually. Like,
yeah, and that's the other potential. Is like,
yeah,
was there a gap
and
because
culturally,
you
we're afraid
struggled
of
a
having hard.
rainbow baby, and
Yeah,
yeah,
we're so afraid of having hard conversations
yeah.
that we just don't want to ask.
And that said, like, I truly appreciate this person asking because
Yeah,
no one's asked me that.
yeah.
Because I just didn't even think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But along the lines of culture, I do feel like here, um, something that is really stood out is just how kid friendly it is. We needed to go get a homestead tax thing. We had to go to a courthouse slash whatever, like a government property building.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought our toddler, and she handed him a pen, and he's like chewing on the pen, and we ended up saying something to like justify that he's chewing on the pen. And this lovely gal is like, oh no, it's not a problem at all, I have a 2 or 3 year old at home.
Mm-hmm.
And regularly, people, since I remember the first week we got here, going to the store and pushing a stroller, and a person turned and saw that I had a kid, and they lit up and they held the door open for me,
Mm-hmm.
and they were like oohing and awing at the baby. And this was like a middle-aged dude or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it was such a shocker to see how much people were valuing the presence of kids. And then, like, going back to that lovely tax, government example, we felt the need to justify what our kid was doing, or like kind of like make a joke or something, like why he was acting up or whatever.
A little bit seeking that it's okay from them.
Yeah, like almost like, yeah, seeking an okay that my kid's like chewing on this pin, because I feel a little bad, but I also don't want to discipline him for this because this is pretty dumb. But just
he was entertaining himself. Is all we could ever want.
Yeah, but it just, there is a sense of families are welcome here, and I say that not to say that families aren't welcome in the Northwest, but to say that I could almost see people wanting to have kids here because kids are out in public regularly. Like, we did not going to the grocery store. You rarely saw families. I always see families here.
Yeah.
Like, people leave their kids with the nanny. They don't take them out to restaurants. Like, there's a clear separation of the adults doing adult things in Seattle and keeping your kids at home or keeping your kids in kids areas. And that divide isn't here. And I think when you do see more people out and about with kids, you feel a greater sense of affection, like, oh, families are good.
Yeah, and I've always gotten a lot of smiles from when Zeke was a baby, but that's just because the expectations for dads are so small.
Oh, that's a good point.
Just me pushing a cart with a baby in it, like, I've gotten so much like, you're such a good dads from just like
random people.
I get it a lot here. It's like walking,
yeah.
I just walking like airing around the neighborhood. I get like catcalled from old ladies, like, you're such a good dad. And I was like, and I'm on one hand, I was like, oh, I'm offended that the expectation of men are so small. On the other hand, I'm like, oh, really?
That's such a good dad.
Oh,
the affection's so nice.
I can just eat that up. But
yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right about that. I don't know how much you're right, because I'm gonna reference a internet argument that I witnessed once about someone saying, "Oh, why should I have to deal with your snot-nosed crotch goblin in the grocery store just because you couldn't find a babysitter?" And the pushback was, "Who gets a babysitter to go to the grocery store?" But also, like, how is that child ever going to learn how to act in public if you don't take them out in public?
I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying what we observed.
But to, a certain group of childless, probably very young people, they're like, why do I need to interact with this thing? And so we were at a friend's house, and they had a bunch of like younger friends,
younger singles and couples.
We were the only people there with children.
Zeke. Yep.
And seeing Zeke try to interact with them, and them completely freezing up.
Like, one person was pretty affectionate, and then the rest of them were like, "Oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do with this thing."
I am not casting stones.
Yeah, because we were like that too.
Let me tell this story. Christina's good friend is a kindergarten teacher. Or she teaches other kids now, right?
Yeah, I think she's second grade now.
At the time, she was a kindergarten teacher, and we went and visited her classroom. And they're like, "Yeah, come in, play with the kids, whatever." Which is actually kind of weird now that we have kids at school. Like, you just let random like friends of the teacher. Anyway, but they did. This was rural Missouri. And like the kids like, "Hey, want to play blocks?" I'm like, I'm gonna go. And I ran. Yeah, like, I actually ran out of I had like, I did not know how to interact with children.
Yeah.
And I still, like, kids that are older than our oldest, I kind of really don't know, because I don't know where they're at developmentally. I kind of know 0 to 6 because I had one. So like, I'm not casting stones on these people. My point is, though, that because kids are seen as separate in other parts of like this country's culture, you don't get to interact with them, and then you don't know how to do the thing.
You don't know, and we could also just add a quick thing. Like, Zeke was our first diaper change for both of us. We called the nurse in, and we're like, "Oh my gosh, he went poop. What do we do?" And the lady like helped us, but she also was like not interested in helping us. Like, you called me in here for this.
There was a record number of births that night. She was very busy.
Yeah, but we had no clue. So we had our fair share. At least I did too. Like, I had my fair share of like, I don't know how to interact with kids, but there's a level of ignoring or never seeing kids that it's almost like you don't even know where to start, because they're just never around.
And we're both the youngest in our families, so.
Yeah. But I think
so this provided no answers.
Yep.
That
was the point.
But it was an interesting question that came up that, again, I've so oriented my life around the institution of fatherhood and raising these two children. And it wasn't exactly an examined thought. And like, there's more I can say about this. We're well over time now. And it'll just be speculation anyway. But what do you think? Hit us up on Instagram if you have kids. Why did you have kids? Like, give me an answer Other than, and it's okay if this was the answer, well, God said for us to multiply, which is true, but no one's sitting in the bedroom being like, well, I don't want to, but God said so. Like, that's not
You didn't have
conversation that's
that
happening.
conversation to
Like, you might have that
things up.
conversation about tithing, you might have that conversation around, any number of other things that God might command, but no one's saying like, I wouldn't, but God said to, so let's hit it. So
Yeah,
there's truth to it, but I don't think that's actually anyone's heart motivation.
right.
So I'm curious
So
for
yeah,
those that
if you
have
have
thought
kids,
about this.
yeah,
What do you think? Hit us up on at nuanced_beauty. I'm
yes,
gonna remember it one of these days.
at nuanced_beauty on Instagram. And yeah, with that, we'll call it a wrap.
Yep, let's wrap it. Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
guys.
All right, this is the part of the podcast where we recommend a book for this week.
Yes, and as a reminder, the intent is not necessarily to make this a book club or that you read every single book we suggest every week.
No, that'd be entirely too many books. All this is just coming from the fact that a lot of the conversations we've had and the conversations that we've wanted to share have come from books that we've read and topics that we enjoy. So with all the books out there, sometimes it's hard to choose what you like. So this is our contribution.
Yeah, and we generally hope that it ties in a little bit with the episode. This week's book recommendation is called Glory in the Ordinary by Courtney Reisig. The subtitle is Why Your Work in the Home Matters to God. It's If you look up this book, you're going to see it's a beautiful off-white book cover, and the word glory is written in cursive, and there's these beautiful flowers placed throughout in the word. And I'm guessing when you see that, you're going to immediately get the vision that this book, the intended audience, is likely a female reader and likely someone who is a Christian. And the thing that I really enjoyed about this book is she digs into the concept of work and how work in the home uh, can feel like meaningless because it's not out there in the workforce, you're not being paid for it, and it's just kind of ordinary, mundane day-to-day operations, and it needs to get done, but it's not beautiful, it's not dreamy, right? And but these tasks still matter, and they matter a lot, and there is meaning to this work even though it's kind of boring, right? And so I had read this book after we had our son Zeke. I think I heard an interview with the author, and what I appreciated out of it was the perspective shift that it gave me. Because, as I somewhat shared in this episode, when we had our first kiddo, it was a career change for me, and I had to wrestle with that. I had to wrestle with what life looked like as a family and changing jobs and changing my priorities because work was definitely a high priority. It be in our household, and work still matters, but I had to redefine what work looked like. And I appreciated how she kind of shared the working outside of the home, how that has evolved over time, and how both spouses working, what that has kind of evolved. And I think she even put some interesting tidbits in there about like conveniences in the home. And I may be getting books mixed up here, but like the idea of a microwave and a dishwasher, how those appliances were supposed to free up time and energy so that, you didn't have to spend time doing all these tasks at home. They were going to free up your time, right? And they are conveniences. I don't know how much of a time saver they are, but it's an interesting thought to consider. So again, that book is Glory in the Ordinary by Courtney Reisig. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in today. We have made it to February, 3 months running. Thank you for tuning in. And as mentioned, you can follow us on Instagram at nuanced_beauty and shoot me an email at nuancedbeauty@yahoo.com and rate and share the show. Take care.